The Synolikos was completed by 1305, having finally received its vast cultural notation and long-awaited account of the mysterious Orient. Fascinatingly, it also contained a surprise culinary section with each entry, including the dishes that define a given area and the recipes for their preparation. It begins exploring the world from west to east, beginning with the Iberian Peninsula. In the early 14th century, this region was dominated by Vasconia under King Ahriman La Rioja IV and Queen Nahia La Rioja. This burgeoning maritime power was almost universally Christian, save for a small Jewish diaspora in the north, centralized in the county of Cantabria, where they were largely confined by laws designed to restrict the movement and behavior of non-Christians. This Christianity, which was once so characterized by bizarre, almost heretical local inclusions, had largely standardized in all ways save for one: the Pistia Sancta, the holy animals whose meat conferred blessing. Indeed, this practice had come to be completely tolerated by the Church of Rhodes as a peculiarity that was not a salvific issue. The kingdom was comprised of two major cultural groups, the various Celtiberian subgroups in the south, and the Basque in the north. The Basque people, though making up only about a quarter of the population, made up the bulk of the nobility, including the La Rioja royal family. This kingdom found itself, like most other places in Europe at the time, on an upward trajectory, enjoying the youthful vigor that came with a golden age. Under the tutelage of King Ahriman IV, a burgeoning naval fleet, the finest in all the world, became their mark of pride, and the late 13th century marked the first true European voyages out into the wider world. Indeed, it was Vasconian explorers that brought the scholars of Thouars around the continent, and it was Captain Tagoni Aguirre that charted the entire west coast of Africa and the savage peoples that populated its untouched coasts, even discovering the southernmost point of the continent before being forced back by bad weather. One notable dish that defined Vasconia was arain horia. This was a rich, savory dish that made use of Vasconia's unique spice connections due to its easternmost holding, Homs, on the other side of the Mediterranean, as well as local ingredients that reflected its traditional fisheries. It consisted of salted sardines, skewered on thin wooden sticks, and grilled over wood chips. Once they got a little charred, they were to be served atop a bed of saffron rice, made with olive oil, salt, onion, and, of course, saffron. Vasconia wasn't left to enjoy this age of prosperity in peace, however, as they were locked in a fierce war with the peninsula's other major inhabitant, Emporia. Emporia languished under the rule of Sufet Nichmad Matanid, who was famous for donating his wife Pigat to Baal's temple, and infamous for continuing to visit her as a paying customer. Emporia, at this time, was at the nadir of its power and glory. It was no longer the great trading power it once was, since an increasingly Christian Mediterranean shut them out of most markets, and even the markets they did have access to, like those of Northern Europe and the Black Sea, treated them with disdain. They had, however, fostered a fairly amicable relationship with Pieria as a fellow anti-Christian realm, and it is this relationship that is even credited with their continued existence up to that point. Indeed, they were completely dependent on it, especially given the war they were grinding out against their northern neighbor, a war of conquest waged by the Christians to completely exile the sons of Baal from the European continent entirely. Meanwhile, to their east, the Parthians simmered a comparable hatred for them and their alien religion. Religiously, the people of Emporia were of the Canaanite faith, worshipping the bull-headed, storm-bringing, sacrifice-gorging god Baal as the head of their pantheon, and Baal's temple served as the center of not only religious, but also civic life. A slaver would offer some exotic infant to Baal's temple for sacrifice in order to gain favor for fair winds and safe travels. An ambitious man seeking the office of Sufet would sponsor great public statues with hollow interiors for written prayers. A young intellectual hoping to be a historian or scribe would visit Baal's temple and know the women there, in order to remain focused on his studies and earn the favor of the Horned God. However, the cracks were beginning to show. Baal's temple received fewer and fewer sacrifices every year. They charged higher prices for their sacred whores and got less business. People even began to cover their nose and mouth at the sickly sweet scent of the sacrifices made in their high places. Indeed, the people began to grow disgusted with them and turned elsewhere. Namely, many of the filthy street urchins and those unfortunates that scrounged in the dust for scraps of life they could live on turned to Islam as a light to them. Islam promised them dignity, but moreover, it promised them revenge. It promised revenge to the man whose daughter was taken from him and pressed into service at the temple. It promised revenge to the vagrants that gnawed on raw fish at the docks. It promised revenge to the siblings of burned children. So, for now, while a state of peace persisted between the two, when war did come, this Islamic underclass was sure to act as a fifth column against the wealthy merchant rulers who sought riches beneath the shadow of the bull god. Culturally, Emporia was almost entirely Canaanite, though ethnically they were of Greek stock, though this became gradually more muddled as many of these people took darker wives and even anointed their own skin to appear darker, like the Carthaginians of old, whom they emulated in their entirety. One food that defined Emporia was actually a condiment, known as jivnuna. Jivnuna was a sour, fishy paste comprised of a fermented fish sauce called jivin, which itself was made of fish, vinegar, and water, which was then mixed with a kind of blue cheese, salt, and sometimes mint, then ground into a paste. Depending on the region, this paste would either be finely ground with a more granular texture, or loosely incorporated, featuring larger chunks of cheese throughout. Jivnuna was had as a dip or as a condiment with essentially everything, though it was especially popular to coat a prepared whole fish, like sea bass or red sea bream, in a thick layer of this paste, which was then cooked in an oven, making a semi-hard shell that preserved the moisture of the fish inside, while also imparting its unique flavor. This largely covered the Iberian region, with Vasconia ascendant and doomed Emporia. Moving to the north, the Gallic region was the singular, sole dominion of Santonia, the very model kingdom of Christendom, boasting all of its advancements and glories. Under King Domneu Corrosion XIV and Queen Abrielle, Santonia was at the very heart of Europe's new age. It was the center of Europe's finest institutions of learning, like the University of Thouars, which produced the Synolikos itself, and as such was at the cutting edge of scientific learning. It was even spiritually flourishing, with the 13th century witnessing the construction of the Allersane Cathedral in the city of Avenio, in the south of the country. Sometimes called the Sword of God, this cathedral took just over 100 years to build, and is even believed to be the tallest building in Europe at the time, if not the entire world, standing at an astonishing 530 feet tall. An architectural marvel, Christians from all over Europe made it a point of pilgrimage, considering its height and its beauty a miracle worth seeing all on its own. Truly, this architectural wonder was a testament to the new age that Europe was ushering in. Religiously, Santonia was entirely Christian, and indeed considered itself defender of the Christian faith, and enforced proper belief on its fellow Christians, like it had managed to do through soft power means in regards to their Vasconian neighbors. Culturally, Santonia was fairly monolithic, with most of the population being some subset of Gaul, though some related minorities did exist, like the Germanic Franks to the west, and the insularly Celtic Valcolergian people along the eastern border. As for food, Santonia is defined by a wide variety of dishes depending on the region, from a hearty variety of hard cheeses in the north, to a kind of fish pie in the west, to pasta dishes to the southeast on the border with Lucania, but one in particular stands out as a quintessentially Santonian meal: gulshish. This meal was crispy, juicy, savory, and extremely decadent, requiring a variety of luxury spices for its optimal form. First, various cuts of chicken meat, especially the breast, wings, and legs, are marinated in buttermilk before being covered in a powdery coating consisting of breadcrumbs, black pepper, powdered garlic, and powdered onion, before being dipped a second time, rebreaded, and completely submerged in lard or beef tallow for deep frying. The result was a luxurious, savory meal that in its highest form was a truly ostentatious way to display your wealth in the form of a richly spiced, flavorful dish, often served with some variation of a sour, salty buttermilk-based sauce for dipping with its own variety of spices. There was a form of gulshish that was on occasion available to commoners, using ground chicken meat, flour, and eschewed the pepper and onion powder in favor of salt and garlic powder, and also typically fried in a shallow pool of fat instead of deep fried. The resulting food was a much cheaper morsel that delighted all the same. Truly, the fact that you could enjoy such rich food on an Easter morning, standing outside your church, the tallest building in the world, was a testament to the grand future that Europe was just now beginning to realize. To the east, in the Italic region, Lucania dominated the peninsula, under their self-styled emperor Ludovico Caecilius and Empress Agnella. The empire, if one could call it that, was at a turning point in its history. Coming off the tail end of a lengthy period of decline, Emperor Ludovico converted to Christianity and even made it the official religion of his realm. Having long tolerated the faith, it has grown to such popularity that millions practice the religion under his nose, and after witnessing the seeming miracle taking place all around him, he was baptized, and thusly baptized the whole country into the arms of Christendom as well. This sparked some serious resistance from the more hardline governors over cities in the south, who had been doing battle with the Sicilians for decades now, but ultimately the transition was fairly easy, and the change brought a sense of hope that the Christian God would share some of his favor with them now too. Religiously, there was a blend of Old Hellenic paganism and Christianity throughout the empire, with the north being more predominantly Christian and the south being more predominantly pagan. However, with the new adoption of Christianity, it's likely that the conversion pressures will increase and sideline pagan practice over the course of the next century or so. Culturally, Lucania was largely of the Latin culture, cousins of the ancient Romans which once had so much potential in time immemorial, though the north harbored a significant minority of Etruscans, ethnic holdovers of the time when they had a kingdom of their own. As for their cuisine, Lucania featured a great deal of local variants, just like Santonia, but defined mainly by various forms of pasta. Patna septa was the most common form, however, and could be enjoyed anywhere in the country. Patna septa was a firm, savory pasta dish, comprised of between 5 and 7 square or rectangular sheets of boiled al dente pasta, filled between each layer with ground beef, garlic, onions, basil, and various cheeses, including ricotta, parmesan, pecorino romano, or even mozzarella cheese. The type of cheese varied depending on the area, but some regions even combined several on this list together in the filling. This was then topped with yet more cheese and baked in an oven until all the ingredients settled and became stable. Depending on the portions, this could either be served in slices to individual guests, or served to an individual as an especially hearty dinner. The rich even added black pepper to the filling, adding yet another complex dimension of flavor. This peninsula wasn't entirely their own, however, as Sicily hounded them from the south and west. Under Doge Velassi di Nuoto and his wife Alessandra, business was booming for Sicily, as their mercantile schools were being attended from all over Europe, and the Doge filled his coffers. However, there were various threats to the prosperity of this mercantile archipelago, that being the threat of the Parthians to their east, and the fact that their major rival to the north just converted to Christianity. Sicily had taken for granted the fact that it could bully and raid their northern neighbor with impunity, but now that they were to be inducted as the latest member of Greater Christendom, such things would become morally difficult. Sicily, for ease of business, had no official religion, but most of their people were Christian nonetheless, even if they were of a wide variety of regional Mediterranean cultures, including Latins, Greeks, Gauls, and even Anglians, with Sicilians making up just under half of the total population. Indeed, beyond making money, Christianity seemed to be a secondary yet nonetheless uniting force behind such a disparate population. This, of course, made business difficult. In the eyes of the Doge, attachments like these always make business difficult. As for their food, their most popular dish reflected their variety of influences as well as their maritime environment and fast-paced lifestyle. Pisci crocetini. Adopting the Santonian practice of deep frying, they would often make baskets of seafood lined with some kind of paper and serve them at all hours of the day, both as snacks and as entire meals. Various kinds of seafood, from squid to oysters to mussels to scallops and even chunks of various types of fish or fish fillets, were first soaked in salted milk, then given an egg yolk wash, then coated with a spiced breading, typically made of flour spiced with parsley and oregano, and in some cases black pepper, then deep fried and served with a drizzle of lemon and a side of some dip, typically tartar sauce or some other tart, creamy condiment. The result was a crispy, golden celebration of cultures coming together in the pursuit of trade and, ultimately, profit. Moving north to the Germanic region, we see a shockingly distinct cultural shift. Gone are the Mediterranean flavors and the certainty of relatively clean borders. Here is a hearty food of a warrior people, surrounded on all sides by a world that is rapidly becoming something they do not recognize. In the south, there are the snake worshippers of Scythia, under King Jago Galanid and Queen Wolvin. The snake eaters of Central Europe found themselves in peculiar territory, given that they lived mostly in the mountains and enjoyed a certain level of security, but they were nonetheless surrounded. To their north was an old rival turned friend of circumstance, Swabia, and a state of peace existed between them only because they were surrounded on all sides by hostile powers. To the west, crusades had once come, to the east, crusades could come, and to the south, Lucania now joined the surrounding Christian armies. Even to the north, Anglia schemed to its own ends and would not tolerate any rivals in its North Sea. Anyway, Scythia itself simply consolidated its holdings and trained its sons in the ways of war. Unless they managed to make some breakthrough of their own, the world would leave them behind and likely chew them up in the process, and of this they were acutely aware. Culturally, Scythia was monolithically comprised of Germano-Celts, being continental Celts that had taken on many Germanic properties from their northern neighbor over time. What did remain completely distinct, however, was their peculiar brand of druidic practice centered around their draconic bloodline descending from Belistat, a mythical dragon known as the Beautiful One, and their subsequent widespread consumption of lizards and snakes. Pursuant to this, it makes sense that their defining meal would be based around a reptile, specifically snakes. This meal, called kanan naum, consists of 2 or 3 grass snakes or smooth snakes, prepared, deboned, lightly salted, ground up with spices like sorrel, fennel, and clove, pushed through a sausage casing made of sheep intestine, then boiled or grilled, served alongside thick slices of toasted bread and a small bowl of sauerkraut. The result is a heavily spiced, bright-tasting meal that is both savory and sour, with a lot of complicated notes elevating the dish. The version with all the spices is reserved for nobility and is considered a sacred religious meal to be eaten on the equinox and solstice days, while a much simpler version, flavored with salt and sorrel, and sometimes dill, is much more common amongst the regular folk, and is eaten as a meal at least once a week. Swabia, meanwhile, had no such luxury of feeling safe in a mountain home. Under their king, Radabod Segamandris, and Queen Dagny, they had geared their entire society towards war as a sacred rite, reserving prisoners and slaves to teach young men how to kill and to get them used to the feeling of taking a man's life. They might not be sharing in the advances of the crucified god, but they didn't need his trinkets and tricks to bristle with might, energy, and vitality. In their eyes, the world wasn't leaving them behind, it was simply trying to run. Religiously, they held fast to ancient Germanic paganism, venerating Wotan and his traditional host of gods. Culturally, they were made up of 3 distinct groups, these being the Swabians, Goths, and Vandals, who administered each major region of the realm in equal measure with a light, informal hand. As for their defining food, this was indisputably blodkasi. Blodkasi was a simple, nutritious, Spartan kind of food, perfect for people who cared for nutrition over ornament and had to be on the move with regular frequency. Put simply, this was a soft goat cheese infused with pig's blood, often eaten with salted meat and a cup of mead to wash it down. This had a soft, almost crumbly texture, akin to blue cheese, that could be spread on bread as well. As for the taste, blodkasi has a bright, salty, almost nutty flavor with a tinny, almost metallic backnote and aftertaste. By combining the two most famous life-giving liquids, blood and milk, blodkasi was the quintessential survival food for the Swabians. They became famous for it. Moving north and west, the Britannic region and Northern European region can, in this age, be considered a single region, due in large part to the near-total dominance of what could now properly be called the Anglian Empire. Under King Theodoric Wicpersunu III and Queen Lefleda, Anglia was thriving, holding essentially uncontested control of the North Sea. The riches of plunder and conquest made their people great. Indeed, by this time, they had even begun to construct their own cities of stone and marble instead of simply living out of those they conquered, moving away from a decentralized village structure and towards a more stratified, formal structure that would be more recognizable to Christendom than their cousins in Central Europe. Indeed, freewheeling raids were a thing of the past, and such roving bands now operated under the auspices and even the command of the crown. One of the great seafaring peoples, they rivaled Sicily and even Vasconia for the quality of their ships and the vastness of their fleets. Indeed, it was under the command of Captain Nightwine Hengist Sunu that the Anglians discovered a huge frozen island beyond the coasts of Iceland, rumored even to have some scattered peoples scrounging out an existence upon its great icy surface. Though Nightwine never really got to know, as a mighty squall turned him back. In any case, it seemed that the Anglians of the fearsome north had found a potent middle way between the ways of their ancestors and the ways of the crucified God's children, that had proven to serve them quite well. Culturally, Anglia was monolithically Anglian, save for an ever-dwindling number of Celtic subjects in the highlands of the Britannic Isles, whose men they drove into slavery, and whose women they took as wives. Indeed, blood was of such importance to the Anglians that they took care to spread their blood like a religion, ensuring a perpetual male-line descent from an unbroken line of Anglian fathers. Indeed, if a man were to take a Celt or a Goth for his wife, for example, then it was required that his son take an Anglian bride, and it was totally forbidden to take non-Anglian wives from anywhere more than a week-long horse's journey from the place of your own birth. In contrast, religion took somewhat of a back seat, with paganism and Christianity of all types generally tolerated and permitted for those of Anglian blood. Indeed, by this time, Anglia was about a quarter Christian, with the lowlands they held on the continent concentrating the vast majority of them into the dense cities and thriving settlements they had there. Indeed, the city of Arnsberg held their largest church, called the Hallagern Cathedral, featuring distinct architectural and design elements that made use of ornately carved wood to evoke their own traditional forms. Some tensions were brewing with the Christians, however, and the crown had long since desired to break the ties between the churches in his country and the Bishop of Rhodes. For now, the pressure was simply building, but it would surely not remain in the background forever. As for their defining dish, it was a thick, hearty stew called Swinniorthnafola. Swinniorthnafola was tailor-made for long, harsh winters and was often kept as a kind of perpetual stew in homes and in taverns as well, kept boiling for months or even years as ingredients were added and taken away over time. In any case, this stew consists of large chunks of pork or sometimes beef, as well as thick cubes of smoked bacon, which was often smoked alongside the stew to preserve large quantities of fatty meat for the winter months. Once the meat was in, it was covered with pork bone or beef bone broth, to which egg yolks were added for thickness, and it was then spiced with salt, parsley, sage, hyssop, mace, cloves, ginger, verjuice, which is the juice of unripe grapes, and, in some especially high-end examples, even a pinch of saffron. Of course, common folk used far fewer spices, instead opting to add butter, extra salt, and even charred breadcrumbs to enhance the flavor. The result, in either case, was a hearty, savory, filling meal that was extremely nutritious and was perfect for making it through a dark and foreboding winter. Often served with ale or beer, this was perhaps one of the most versatile and cozy dishes of the age, certainly contrasting the fearsome reputation that the often ruthless Anglians earned themselves abroad. The only regional competitor left for them was Iblania, ruled over by a council of druids, which was currently headed by a wise woman who went by the name Aisling. This was a mysterious and cloistered island, totally closed off from the wider world, to the extent that the authors of the Synolikos were totally denied entry and had to go off the accounts of men who had fled the country. Apparently, they were steeped in secret pagan occultism and were dedicated to the research of incendiary weapons. No man was allowed to come or go, and the ruling council of druids punished the mere talk of leaving with death. Many Christians spoke of the place as an isle of witches, and according to some escapees, this take is more or less correct, even if they worship false gods instead of the devil. As such, they're both culturally and religiously monolithic, being Celtic druid pagans. As for their defining dish, it was a bright soup called suguar. Suguar consisted of cubed chicken breast, pork fat, egg yolks, an onion, salt, rosemary, marjoram, ginger, and in some cases black pepper, cinnamon, and saffron. The result was a fortifying, bright-tasting soup that filled the belly and strengthened the soul, and was even rumored to heal the sick. On the other side of the continent, Europe was controlled by Novgorod in the north and Guthonia in the south, with the westernmost portion of Scythian territory extending there as well. Novgorod, under King Radomir Novgorodsky and Queen Zarya, found itself in a crowded neighborhood, on the cusp of regional power. Only just barely riding the rising tide of the New Age, they scrambled to make themselves as modern as possible while retaining what made them uniquely Slavic. Culturally, they were monolithically Slavic, save for some pockets of Sami people in the far north. Religiously, they held to old Slavic paganism, worshipping Perun, the royal family even considering themselves descendants of the great god. As for their defining food, karmani are an easy pick. Karmani are pockets of fried dough filled with beef, mushrooms, onions, and various spices, making for a filling, hearty, and eminently convenient meal that could be enjoyed as a street food or even as an elevated example of fine dining, should the chef use rare spices. Guthonia, meanwhile, under King Amalric Ingodres and Queen Hilda, had so successfully constructed a near-impregnable system of castles and fortresses that they had long since neglected venturing out into wider Europe, only now beginning to make claims and contest territory. Truly, they were much like a great turtle. Culturally, they were almost monolithically Goth, though they did harbor some Germanic minorities in the west. As for religion, Christianity had long taken root in that land, and so thoroughly that it was now considered a prime spot for Christendom's finest Christmas celebrations. Pursuant to this, their most iconic food was actually a drink, hochmilk. Hochmilk was a delightful milk-based beverage consisting of cow's milk, honey, egg yolks, cinnamon, cloves, vanilla, and nutmeg. With all the spices, it was a drink for the aristocracy, served cold to appreciate the fine flavors, while a less spiced version was available to the common folk, typically served warm. Often, however, during the holiday season, the wealthy nobles would sponsor huge cauldrons of the good stuff to be heated up and served to the masses for no charge at all. An exorbitant waste of money, to be sure, but there is no better display of the holiday spirit in all Christendom. Next, we come to Great Scythia, royal and sprawling and fearsome, currently under the rule of Barosarvan Ariaskuthes Agarid and his bride Tarka. Scythia found itself in the midst of hell throughout the entire 13th century, locked in bitter and seeming eternal struggle with the Mongols to their east, harsh competitors for space on the steppe. Unwittingly, their years of bloody struggle acted as a guarantee of safety for Western Europe, though the Scythians had little say in the matter. Europe was only able to flourish as it had because an ocean of Scythian blood separated them from the Mongol horde. For Scythia, it was a struggle that was either life or death. They had no choice but to fight. Culturally, the Scythian ethnic core made up both the majority of the people in the realm and the entirety of the ruling class. However, roughly 40% of Scythia's subjects were non-Scythian, like Greeks, Slavs, Cossacks, and even some Goths. Religiously, Scythia was a land of near total religious freedom, so long as conquered peoples relinquished their tribute in gold, flesh, and statues of their gods to be added to the Hadav Kodah. Indeed, the ruling Agarid family could be said to be hyper-polytheistic, building a veritable army of gods in an attempt to concentrate their holiness and lay claim to exclusive worship rights over certain gods like Poseidon, almost as though they were kidnapping another people's god. As for food, Agisank exemplifies Scythian cuisine best. First, a metal cauldron is filled with stones heated in a fire, then various cuts of mutton meat are placed within alongside various vegetables and spices, like turnips, carrots, caraway seeds, salt, black pepper, and cloves, and then some mare's milk is splashed onto the food, and it is covered to cook for an hour or sometimes several hours. The result is a hearty, earthy, filling meal that can serve a whole family for several days, and features all of the nutrients necessary for a hard life on the steppe. Often, this is paired with kefir, a kind of cultured yogurt drink popular among the Scythians. Moving back south and west, the Balkans was a complicated mess of powers between Christian Armistia, pagan Hellas, and satanic Pieria. Armistia, under Bashkim Befresheri VII, and his bride Fatmire, Armistia would almost certainly have been obliterated by now were it not for their conversion to Christianity and subsequent relationship with the Bishop of Rhodes, who directly takes responsibility for them and their protection. As such, the Armistian people seem to be at peace for the first time in centuries, able to breathe easy and believe that the future actually does have a place for them. Given that they're such a small country, they're monolithically Albanian, and now monolithically Christian as well. As for their defining dish, it would have to be shpela chengen. First, a quality cut of lamb rump is salted and covered in sauce made of butter, olive oil, mushrooms, rosemary, shallots, garlic, and mustard, then covered in a special dough, given an egg wash, and baked. The resulting food is crispy, rich food that is reserved for times of celebration, like weddings or first birthdays. Hellas, under King Bithos Brincazarid V and Queen Makarna, was in a precarious position. They found themselves pressured on all sides by Christians to the north and south, but even more so by their ancient enemy to the west, Pieria. Hellas didn't have a single friend in the world, and it seemed as though their end was nigh unless they made a big breakthrough somewhere. Culturally, they were majority Thracian, though they also had significant Dacian, Goth, and Greek minorities. Religiously, the crown enforced the common worship of traditional pagan sun gods in the Thracian and Dacian pantheons, marking all other faiths as totally illegal and their practice punishable by death. Regardless, it is rumored that Christianity was spreading in the south on the border with Rhodes, and that satanic cults operated in the country's western reaches. Pieria, under Vragoi Agron Verzalid and his favorite concubine Ilber, was brimming with energy during the 13th century, on the cusp of lashing out across Europe. In the ensuing decades since the Moonlight Revelation, the satanic faith had taken hold of the whole country, becoming far more than an aristocratic cult, instead establishing itself as the official and mandatory state religion, which the people took up quite enthusiastically, as they became unfettered by standard moral principles, stealing from their enemies, taking mistresses, and abandoning their families altogether, for the pursuit of money or pleasure. Of course, actions against fellow Dark Scions was becoming ever more prohibited, so this resulted in pogroms against the country's Christian, Jewish, and pagan minorities. Culturally, they were majority Illyrian, though they hosted a significant Skordiskian minority in the north and east, the Skordiskians being a distinct, non-Germanic Central European people group. Religiously, now that it was illegal to be anything else, almost everybody, save for the most persecuted minorities, were scions of the Moonlight Revelation. However, cracks were beginning to show in their theological framework that threatened to tear that carefully constructed religious status quo to shreds. It was the orthodox belief of the Temple of the Dragon that, should enough people reach demonhood before the apocalypse, that a great enough infernal army could be assembled to defeat the Creator God. However, some heretical theologians hypothesized that if the Creator God created all things, then all the power of creation itself could be contained within him, and there is no army strong enough to possibly overcome him, spelling ultimate doom for the Dark Scions of the Dragon Temple, meaning that one should live life totally unfettered and as evil as possible, eschewing the rules of the Satanic Masters, and subsequently commit ritual suicide so one may enjoy their time as a demon for as long as possible before the inevitable doom comes for all the children of Satan. This meant killing other people at random, including other Dark Scions, burning down large public buildings with themselves still inside, and even consuming the living flesh off of random passerby. This heresy was called Dominionism, coming from the Illyrian word for doom. Dominianism was immediately condemned as heresy and its cultists marked for death, as the Temple of the Dragon produced its own theological counter to its understanding of theology. In Genesis, when the Creator God makes the world, it is said that he was over the face of the waters. The Dragon Temple takes this to mean that there was a pre-existent metaphysical substrate that existed beyond the Creator God, and that he must draw on this substance for the creation of new souls. If the fifth principle of the Dragon Temple, the principle of proliferation, is properly followed, and enough new converts are inducted into the teachings of the Moonlight Revelation, then a large enough army can indeed be built to defeat the Creator God at the end of days. In any case, Vragoi Agron was redirecting attention elsewhere, seeking to rile up his people for a potential invasion of Hellas, their ancient enemy. As for their defining food, that would have to be a kind of spiced wine called Demon Vina. A rich wine cocktail, it consists of a deep, fruity red wine vintage, mulled and heated, then spiced with mace, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and even black pepper, occasionally mixed with a couple drops of human blood. The result is a sweet, spicy drink that is exorbitantly expensive and reserved only for the Pyrrhian elite. Moving south to finish out Europe, the eastern Mediterranean was dominated by the Kingdom of Rhodes under Aristophanes III, Bishop of Rhodes. Indeed, the king, Jordanes Demeratid XVI, and Queen Sophia were little more than figureheads at that point. The king long since relegated to nothing more than the head general of the church's armies, without any further power beyond that post. The state of the kingdom was stable and powerful, inducting new realms into Christendom, and ready to respond to any threat that may come to challenge the ascendant Church of Christ. Culturally, they were largely Greek, though they did host significant minorities of Phrygian, Lydian, Luwian, Armenian, and even Aramaic peoples. Religiously, Christianity was the state religion and the only legal faith, so things on that front were quite uniform indeed. As for their most defining food, that was most definitely saragli. Saragli are a sweet dessert roll where a filling of dates, ground cloves, cinnamon, and finely chopped pistachios, walnuts, and almonds are wrapped in a light and flaky dough, which is then given a butter wash, baked, and drizzled with a kind of syrup made from honey, lemon juice, and water. The result is a delightful treat, best enjoyed on warm, sunny days, perfect for Easter celebrations, or simply as a nice morsel after church. Armenia is nearby, but by this point they were a largely vestigial polity, almost totally under the control of Rhodes, which was on the verge of simply absorbing them wholesale. Africa and the Middle East can be covered as one unified region, given that Parthia so dominates both areas. Parthia, under Shah Arshak Rafat Meghalid and his wife Lunara, was a great behemoth, with no real rivals to their south save for Syria and Saba, who were frail by comparison. Parthia had successfully held off the Mongols to the east because they were busy with the Scythians in the north, and were on the tail end of a consolidation phase where they had brought their more recent conquests firmly under the control of the Shah and his viziers. Culturally, just over 35% of the country was Turco-Persian, with the rest of the population made up of various minority peoples, like Persians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Kurds, Armenians, Greeks, Afghans, Tajiks, and even Bedouins. This multi-ethnic empire was a testament of their recent expansion, but also sowed the seeds of potential unrest in the future. Religiously, Islam was embraced by most of the population, though Christians and Jews represented stubborn religious holdouts, and the illegal Zoroastrians were a rebellious force in the east, aligning themselves against the Shah and the Turco-Persian Muslims which had come to control the country. Finally, Asia, as far as the scholars of the Synolikos had managed to gather, was controlled by the Great Khan, Mandukalu Ulgen, supported by his wife Alktanimeg, with some holdouts far to the east, and the kingdoms of Morea and Dravidia in what was left of unconquered India. The Mongol Empire was at a true zenith point, controlling everything from Afghanistan in the west to the northernmost island of Japan in the east. The Great Khan administered an age of trade and peace under his auspices, so long as those he conquered gave total submission to him, relinquishing their wealth, and sometimes their people, to the horse lords. As such, he was lord over countless peoples and countless religions, all of which were permitted so long as submission was given in kind. The Mongol Empire's one problem was that Scythia had not yet bent the knee. Their cities were in disrepair and their people were dying by the tens of thousands, but royal Scythia had still not fallen to the Mongol horde. Every day that the Scythians lived was another day of shame for the Khan that styled himself the destined ruler of the entire world. As for the food that defined the Mongols, this was budog. Budog was an entire goat, shorn, deboned, and completely hollowed out, filled with a mixture of shredded goat and marmot meat, which was then seasoned with salt, pepper, thyme, rosemary, and bay leaves, filled the rest of the way with hot stones, then closed back up and rolled around to ensure even cooking and flavor distribution, before it was opened back up and served. The result was a filling, meaty meal that provided sustenance for a long campaign and could feed several men at once. A utilitarian meal exemplary of the Mongolian people. Morea, to their south, was the final destination for the Synolikos explorers before they returned home. Under King Binduryagupta Maurya and Queen Tishivaki, their realm was struggling. Having fell from their former place as a great empire, they now languished as a shadow of their former glory and feared for their lives at every moment, as it was under threat from the Mongols and the Parthians alike. Culturally, they were host to a wide variety of Indian ethnicities, and religiously were home to many varieties of Hinduism, though Buddhism held on in some areas, despite being illegal to practice. Also, Dravidia was in an interregnum to the south, and a royal joining of the two was considered for the sake of security. As for a defining food, barbar chana could be found on every street corner, and as a staple in every home. Consisting of chickpeas, mutton, ginger, garlic, onion, lime, cardamom, cloves, black pepper, turmeric, and salt, these ingredients were mixed in a big pot and served on broad tropical leaves or simple metal dishes, and then eaten with naan bread and the assistance of one's fingers, used to stir and portion out the food. And so, the Synolikos was finally penned, and with its completion and publication, the peoples of Europe were enlightened, and gained a concept about the world beyond Europe more than they ever had before. It spurred a new zeal for exploration, and many men now dreamed of exploring that frozen island to the north that Nightwine saw, or visiting the unconquered islands to the east of the Great Khan's holdings, rumored to harbor a magnificent, civilized people similar in many ways to their own. Santonia, meanwhile, found itself moved by the account of Scythia's sufferings, and thus began a Santonian fascination with that eastern people, and perhaps even the beginnings of a possible alliance, one day still distant.